You have always been different, not in a way that could be named, in a way that could only be felt. The tribe felt it. You felt it. No one said anything because there were no words for it yet. So you went to the forest to find the words, or something older than words. What you found there changed everything. Before we begin, this story runs alongside the others in this series. While someone else was looking at the chief's wife on a narrow path, while someone else was being sent into the forest with one word, while someone else was learning to hunt alone and finding a new tribe, you were somewhere else entirely, in a different part of the forest, with a different problem. Your problem was this: you have always known things you should not know, felt things before they happened, seen things in the edges of your vision that disappeared when you looked directly at them, heard something in the wind that sounded sometimes almost like a voice. This is not madness, you have wondered, but madness is the absence of pattern, and what you experience has pattern. It is consistent and repeating, and it has been with you since you were a child, growing stronger as you grew, demanding something from you that you do not yet have a name for. You are 22 years old. You are female. You are the most gifted healer your tribe has ever had, though they do not have a word for healer yet either. You are going to the forest alone because the thing inside you has finally become louder than everything else. In this story, you are her. This is your forest. This is what it shows you. You noticed it first when you were very small. The other children played the games children play, chasing and hiding, and the simple contests of speed and strength that children use to learn their bodies. You played too because you wanted to be part of it, because belonging felt important in a way you could not explain. But something was always slightly off, a half step to the side of where the others were, a part of your attention always somewhere else. You noticed things they did not notice. The old dog at the edge of camp, lying in the same spot 3 days before. It died. You knew before it happened, not in words, in a feeling in your chest, a heaviness that arrived and would not leave. When the dog died, the feeling lifted. You were 6 years old. You did not tell anyone. The child who got sick in the deep winter, you woke the night before with a knowledge in your body that something was wrong, a specific wrong, not general unease, but pointed and directional. In the morning, the child was feverish. The tribe's oldest woman treated her. You watched and remembered everything. You started helping without being asked, bringing the right plants before anyone said which ones were needed, knowing where the pain was before the person told you, understanding through some channel you could not explain what the body was saying when it said it in ways others could not read. The oldest woman noticed. She watched you the way you watched things, carefully, from a slight distance, not announcing herself. One day when you were perhaps 10 years old, she gave you a root and asked you what it was for. You had never been taught. You held it in your hands and felt it and said what came to you. You were correct. She looked at you for a long time without speaking. Then she began to teach you properly, and what she taught you was the knowledge of 30 years of learning, compressed and offered to someone who already knew half of it without being shown. Being different in a small tribe is complicated. The tribe needs sameness for cohesion. needs everyone to move in the same direction, needs the group to function as a group. But the tribe also needs the person who is different, who sees what others cannot, who moves in the direction the others cannot go. You are both welcome and unsettling, both needed and slightly feared. You have learned to carry this. As you grew, the difference grew with you. The healing work deepened. You became the one people came to when the oldest woman could not help, when the usual remedies had been tried and failed, when the problem was not in the body in any simple way, but in the space between the body and whatever else a person was made of. You did not have words for this space. You worked in it anyway. You learned that fear was often the root of illness, that grief lived in the chest and could calcify there into something physical, that certain people carried wounds so old they had forgotten the wound and only felt the ache of it. These things you could sometimes help, not always, but sometimes. The tribe respected you. This respect had a quality of distance in it, the slight stepping back that people do around something they are not entirely comfortable with. You felt it and you understood it, and you did not hold it against them. They were not wrong to feel it. You were not entirely comfortable with yourself either. At night, increasingly, you could not sleep. Not the sleeplessness of worry or grief, something else, a restlessness in the body that was not physical, a feeling of something pressing from the inside, trying to find a way out. The dreams were vivid and strange, full of shapes and colors that had no equivalent in the waking world, sounds that were almost language, figures at the edges of vision that disappeared when you tried to see them clearly. You woke from these dreams with the sense of having been almost somewhere, of having reached the edge of something and been pulled back before you could see what was on the other side. This happened more and more often, then every night. Then you stopped sleeping deeply at all, living in the shallow water between sleep and waking, where the edges were always near. You knew what you needed to do. You had known for some time. You had been postponing it because the knowing of it was frightening, and the doing of it would be more frightening still. There are things that will not wait forever. The body has its own schedule and its own demands, and it does not negotiate indefinitely. What is trying to come through you has been patient for 22 years. You can feel the patience thinning. Whatever is waiting on the other side of that threshold is going to pull you through it, whether you are ready or not. The only question is whether you go deliberately or are dragged. You chose to go deliberately. This required leaving the tribe. You told no one where you were going or why. This was not secrecy. It was the absence of words. What you were going to do had no name in your language because no one had done it before. Not exactly. Not like this. The oldest woman had gone to the forest sometimes, for plants, for quiet. But not for this. Not for the thing you were going for. You took what you needed. Water, a small amount of food for the first days, your knife, the bag of dried plants and powders you had been assembling slowly over the past months, collecting and preparing with a care you could not explain, except that every time you worked on it, the pressing feeling eased slightly, like feeding something that was hungry. You left before dawn. The camp was sleeping. The fire low, the familiar shapes of the people you had known your whole life, bundled in their skins. You looked at them for a moment before you left. The old woman, the children, all of them. You didn't know how long you would be gone. You didn't know if you would come back the same person. These were the honest answers to questions you didn't ask yourself directly, because some questions are best approached from the side. You walked into the trees. The forest at dawn, before the light has fully arrived, is a different thing from the forest in daylight. The shapes are suggestions. The sounds are amplified by the silence underneath them. Your footsteps on the leaves were the loudest thing in the world. Then they were not, because you learned within the first hour to move differently, without the wait-forward urgency of someone going somewhere, with the patient, unhurried step of someone who is already where they need to be. The forest receives you without ceremony. It does not welcome you, and it does not warn you away. It is simply there, as it has always been, as it will be long after you are gone, doing what forests do, growing, breathing, holding inside it everything that has ever lived and died inside it, the accumulated presence of every creature and every season and every storm. You walk into this, and it closes around you, and you are inside it now. This is where the work begins. The first 3 days, you did almost nothing. This was not idleness. It was the hardest thing you had done. Everything in you that had been shaped by the tribe, by the constant activity and purpose of communal life, pushed against the stillness. There was always something to do in the tribe, always a task, always a need, always someone requiring something. Here there was nothing, only the forest and the sky and the particular quality of silence that is not silence at all, but simply the absence of human sound. You sat. You moved when you needed to eat or drink. You lay down when your body asked for sleep. You let the hours pass without filling them. On the second day, you noticed the forest differently, not the trees as obstacles or providers of wood or shelter from wind. The trees as themselves, the specific way each one grew, the lean of a trunk toward light, the spread of roots visible above the soil, the texture of bark that had been accumulating for decades, the intelligence of it, not human intelligence, something slower and more patient and more complete. You put your hand on the bark of an old oak. You stood there for a long time. You were not sure what you were doing. It felt correct. On the third day, the dreams changed, or rather, the state that had been only available in dreams began to be available while you were awake. Sitting still in the forest, eyes open or closed, it became possible to reach the shallow water between sleeping and waking intentionally, to hold yourself there without falling into full sleep. The edges began to appear, the shapes at the periphery, the sound that was almost language. You did not reach for them. You let them come closer on their own terms. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the presence of everything you usually move fast enough to avoid. When you stop moving, the things you have been outrunning catch up with you, and they are not always comfortable things, but they are yours. They have always been yours. You have simply been too busy to receive them. On the fourth day you started, the preparation had been in the bag for months, assembled piece by piece, with a knowledge you could not account for, as if something had been guiding your hands through the collecting and the drying and the mixing. You took it out now and looked at it, and the pressing feeling in your chest responded immediately, a quickening. a recognition. You built a small fire, not for warmth, for the center of the space, the anchor point, the thing that a ritual needed, the way a body needed a heartbeat. The fire had always been the center of human life, and you understood now, in a way you had not before, that this was not only practical. The fire was the meeting point between the visible world and the one behind it, the place where transformation happened in plain sight. You sat before it. You prepared the mixture the way your hands knew to prepare it, unhurried, each step following the last, with the inevitability of something that has been practiced, though you had never practiced this, had never done this before. The hands knew anyway. You breathed the smoke, not much. The oldest woman had taught you the difference between using a thing as a tool and being used by it, and this required the same precision as any other medicine. A little. Enough to open the door, not enough to lose the hand that held it. The forest changed, not dramatically, not in the way that things change in stories, suddenly and completely. The change was more like the change when your eyes adjust to different light, a gradual revelation of what was already there. The colors deepened. The sounds separated into layers. The air became textured, had a quality it did not usually have, a density and presence. You sat with this and breathed and let it settle. The first time you open a door, you did not know was there. You do not walk through it immediately. You stand in the doorway and let your eyes adjust to what is on the other side. This is wisdom, not cowardice. What is on the other side has been there for a long time, and it will still be there when you are ready. There is no rush. The door is open now. That is enough for now. The days began to blur at the edges, not because you were losing yourself, because the rigid boundaries between day and night, between sleeping and waking, between self and forest, were becoming more permeable. You moved through them more easily. You understood them as the conventions they were, useful structures that the waking world needed, and that here in this work were less necessary. You ate when you were hungry. You slept when you were tired. You performed the ritual when the time for it arrived, which you knew not by any external sign, but by the internal readiness, the feeling of the door being open and the threshold being crossable. The visions were coming more clearly now, not visions exactly. That word implied something seen with the eyes, and these were not seen with the eyes. They were felt with the whole body, received rather than watched, closer to the experience of being in a strong wind than to the experience of looking at a picture. They had shape and temperature and direction. They moved. You began to understand some of what they were saying, not in language, in the way you understood the body when it spoke its own language, the way you knew what the sick person needed before they told you. The same channel, open wider. The things moving at the edge of your perception were not random. They were purposeful. They were trying to show you something. You followed where they led. This meant moving through the forest at times when it did not seem like a practical direction, sitting in places that called to you for reasons you could not explain, spending hours with your hands in the soil or your back against a tree that felt different from other trees in a way you could not justify. You followed all of it. You had come here to follow. The healer's art is older than any herb or remedy. It is the art of listening to what the body says in its own language and responding in kind. You have been doing this for other people for years. Now you are learning to do it for something larger. The forest has a body. The world has a body. It speaks in the same language as the human body, which is the language of all living things, and you are one of the few people alive who can hear it. On the 12th night, you went deeper than you had gone before. You knew it was different from the beginning. The preparation felt different, heavier with significance, the fire burning differently, a quality of attention in the forest around you that was new, as if the trees had turned toward you. The air was very still. Even the night sounds were muted, the forest holding its breath. You sat, you breathed, you let go. This is the hardest part to describe because the tools of description, the words and the comparisons, and the sequences of cause and effect are all tools of the waking mind. And where you went, the waking mind was not fully present. What remains is impression, fragment, the outline of something that was whole in the experiencing and becomes partial in the telling. Darkness, not the darkness of closed eyes or a moonless night, a darkness with depth to it, a darkness that went further in every direction than any space you had ever been in. You were inside it, but it was not threatening. It was simply what was there, as ordinary as the forest, as matter of fact as stone. Then, light. Not the light of fire or sun, something cooler and more diffuse, coming from no single source, present everywhere evenly, illuminating the darkness, the way water fills a space, occupying every part of it simultaneously, and in the light, shapes. What you saw in that place is not something that translates into words without losing most of itself. The people who will come after you, thousands of years from now, will develop languages for this experience, will build temples and write sacred texts and argue about the nature of what they find in these deep places. You have none of that. You have only the direct experience, unmediated, without framework. In some ways, this is the purest form. In some ways, it is the loneliest. The shapes resolved into figures, not people exactly, the outline of people, the suggestion of a human form, without the detail that makes a person specific. They were present the way a shadow is present, defined by what surrounded them, rather than by what they were in themselves. There were many of them. They moved without moving, which is to say, their positions changed without you observing the change in between. The way the position of a fire's shadow changes when you look away and look back. One moment at a distance, the next closer, the next beside you, each transition unwitnessed. You were not afraid. This surprised you, the absence of fear. You had expected fear. The preparation for this had included a preparation for terror, the oldest woman's teachings about the places the mind could go and the things it could encounter and the importance of holding the thread back to the waking world. But what you felt was not fear. It was the feeling of arriving somewhere you had been trying to reach for a very long time. The feeling of a question and its answer occupying the same space. The figures did not speak. They communicated in the way the sick communicated when they were too weak for words, in pressure and temperature and direction, in the quality of presence they brought to the space around them. You understood some of it, not all. There was more than you could hold, more than your mind had the capacity to receive fully. You held what you could. They showed you things, not visions of events, not prophecies, something more fundamental, the structure of things, the way the seen and unseen world were connected, not separate places, but the same place perceived from different angles. The way what happened to one part of the living world happened to all of it. The thread that ran through everything, you held this thread. You held it until the light began to change, and the figures began to recede, and the darkness softened, and the forest came back to you, the sounds first, then the cold, then the fire reduced to coals before you, then your own hands in your lap, familiar and real. You came back changed, not in any way that showed on the surface. Your hands were the same hands. The forest was the same forest. But the way you understood both was different, and the difference was permanent. You had been given something that could not be ungiven, shown something that could not be unseen. This is the nature of the threshold. You cross it, and you do not uncross it. Dawn was coming. You sat with the coals and watched it arrive. You spent 3 more days in the forest, not performing the ritual again. What had happened on the 12th night had been enough, more than enough, a fullness that needed time to settle before anything could be added to it. These 3 days were for integration, for the slow process of bringing what you had received into alignment with the world you were going to return to. The forest was different in these days, or your perception of it was different, which came to the same thing. You moved through it with a quality of attention that was new, seeing not just what was visible, but the pattern underneath the visible, the connections between things, the web of relation that held everything in its place. A deer in the trees to the east, grazing, unaware of you. You felt its presence before you saw it, a warmth in the direction of it, at a specific aliveness. You watched it for a long time, the way it moved through its own world with complete absorption, no part of its attention elsewhere, entirely present in each moment of its existence. You thought about what it meant to be entirely present. You had spent your whole life slightly outside yourself, one part of your attention always in the other place, the place between. The work in the forest had not taken you away from yourself. It had, surprisingly, brought you more fully into yourself. The door between the 2 places was open now and would stay open, and this meant you did not have to push at it constantly anymore. You could simply be here, in this body, in this forest, and the other place would be there when you needed it. This was the gift, not the visions or the figures or the thread of connection. At the gift was the ability to be present, fully, in both places at once, without being torn apart by the effort. You understood now what you were, not in your language, which had no word for it, in the oldest language, the one before words, the one that the figures in the light had used. You were the person who stood at the threshold, the one who went between. Every human group in every era has had someone like you. They have called this person different names in different languages, given the role, different shapes in different cultures, surrounded it with different rules and rituals and expectations. But the person was always there in every group, standing at the place where the visible and invisible worlds touched and translating between them. You did not choose this. It chose you. It has always chosen its own. On the 15th day, you prepared to leave, not to go back to your tribe. Not yet. Something else first, a direction that had been pulling at you since the morning after the deep ritual, a pull to the east, insistent and specific, the way the pull toward water was specific when you were very thirsty. You followed it. The forest to the east was different from the forest you had been living in, older in places, the trees larger, the undergrowth thinner under the heavy canopy. You moved through it with the ease that the forest had given you, your feet finding the quiet path, your senses extended and receiving. You smelled the smoke before you saw them. A fire, not large, a campfire, the specific smell of a communal fire, the kind that burned through the day and the night, maintained and fed out the smell of a group of people rather than a single traveler. You stopped. You let the smell tell you what it could. A group, not large. The smoke was not heavy enough for a large group. Perhaps 10, perhaps fewer. The fire had been burning for some time, days at least. They were not passing through. They were camped. You moved toward them carefully, not because you were afraid, because careful approach was the respectful approach, the approach that gave the other party time to see you coming and make their own choices. You had learned this watching the encounter between others at a stream, in a story you did not yet know, but whose lesson you arrived at independently, because some lessons are universal. You showed yourself at the edge of the trees. The meeting of two strangers is always a negotiation conducted without words. At the body speaks first, the posture, the pace, the openness or closure of the hands, the direction of the eyes. You have spent your life reading these things in the sick, the grieving, the frightened. Now you read them in a group of people who have seen you emerge from the trees and are deciding in this moment what you are to them. They saw you immediately. A woman near the fire looked up first. She made no sound, but her stillness alerted the others, the way stillness always did, the abrupt absence of motion drawing attention more effectively than any cry. Heads turned, bodies shifted. You stayed where you were, at the edge of the trees, visible, not advancing. You showed your hands. The group assessed you. You let them. You were alone, unarmed in any obvious way, a young woman emerging from the forest with open hands. You did not represent a threat that required immediate response. They understood this. You could see the recalibration happening, the shift from alarm to something more considered. A man stood, not urgently, with the deliberate movement of someone who has decided to take charge of a situation. He was lean and dark-haired, a younger than you might have expected for a leader, with a quality of stillness about him that reminded you immediately and unmistakably of the oldest woman back in your tribe, the same quality of someone who had learned to read the world slowly and carefully and act from that reading rather than from impulse. He walked towards you, not fast, the measured pace of someone approaching a situation they intended to handle well. He stopped perhaps 10 feet from you and looked at you directly, and you looked back at him. And in that look, there was the rapid exchange of information that happens between two people who are both accustomed to reading others. You saw a man who had been through something. The forest had left its mark on him in ways you recognized because you were carrying the same marks. At the look of someone who had been reduced to essentials and had learned which essentials mattered, the steadiness of someone who had faced something difficult and come through it without being broken. He saw you. You did not know exactly what he saw, but his expression after the long look was not wariness or dismissal. It was something closer to recognition, the specific expression of a person who has encountered something they were not expecting to find and understands, in the moment of finding it, that it matters. Two people who have each been through the forest alone, who have each been shaped by it and come out the other side different from how they went in, who recognize in each other the specific quality that the forest gives to those it has worked on. At these two people, looking at each other across 10 feet of forest floor, are looking at something neither of them has seen before in another person. You are not the same, but the difference is the same kind of different. This is rarer than it sounds. He brought you to the fire, not with words, with the gesture of invitation, the slight movement of the head, and the turning of the body that meant come. That was the same gesture in every human group you had ever encountered, because some things did not need inventing separately. You followed. The group received you with the careful courtesy of people who had learned through experience that strangers were not automatically enemies. There was a young woman with quick eyes who watched you with open curiosity and no pretense of doing otherwise. A broad-shouldered man who nodded once and moved to make space. Others who assessed and then relaxed by degrees as the minutes passed and nothing happened that required a different response. You sat at the fire. The warmth of it was extraordinary after 15 days of forest cold, and not just physical warmth, the warmth of a communal fire, the specific quality of heat generated by a group, a warmth that contained within it the meaning of what a group was and what it meant to be inside one. You had not felt this in 15 days. You had not known how much you missed it. The lean man sat across the fire from you. He did not pepper you with questions, did not perform the anxious hospitality of someone trying to fill silence. He sat and let the silence be what it was, which was comfortable, which told you something important about him. You looked at each other across the fire several times as the evening progressed. Each time, the look lasted a moment longer than necessary. Each time, it contained the same thing, the mutual recognition of two people who were, for reasons neither of them could yet articulate, going to be important to each other. You did not know his story. He did not know yours. The stories would come, piece by piece, in the shared language you would build over days and weeks. For now, there was the fire and the evening and the recognition across the flames. This is where it begins, not with drama or declaration, with two people at a fire, looking at each other, understanding something before they have the words for it. The oldest stories always begin this way: the fire, the face across it, the knowledge that something has started that is going to continue for a long time. The evening deepened, the fire burned. You stayed. You had found what the pull to the east was pointing at. You did not yet know what it would cost. That knowledge was still ahead of you in the stories that had not yet happened. And for now, there was only the fire and the warmth and the lean man across it, and the beginning of something that had no name yet. A note on history. The figure of the shaman, a person who moves between the ordinary world and the world behind it, is one of the oldest and most universal in human culture. Archaeological evidence for shamanic practice dates back at least 30,000 years, and possibly much further, found in cave paintings, burial objects, and the remains of ritual sites across multiple continents. The use of plant medicines in ritual contexts appears to be extremely ancient. Evidence of medicinal plant use by Neanderthals has been found, suggesting that the knowledge of plants and their effects on consciousness predates modern Homo sapiens entirely. Female shamans appear throughout the archaeological and anthropological record. In many cultures, women were the primary practitioners of healing and ritual work, and the association of women with this role has deep prehistoric roots. The experience described in this story, the trance state, the dissolution of boundaries, the encounter with presences in the deep place, is reported consistently across shamanic traditions worldwide, in cultures with no contact with each other. This consistency suggests the experience has a biological basis, rooted in the structure of human consciousness itself, rather than being culturally constructed. What she found in the forest is what people have always found there, when they go deep enough and stay still enough and open the right doors. The forest has been showing people things for as long as there have been people to show. It has not stopped. Good night.